Good morning, Year 5. Welcome to your last Monday of home learning. I can't wait to see you all back next Monday when we're going to be able to get back to doing things in person and getting back to doing things a little bit more normally, and that is what more familiar to you. So we're on our last science lesson of home learning. As I promised last week, this week you're going to be able to set up your own experiment and design and create your own variables and the equipment you need and how you're going to collect your data. You're going to be doing all that today. I'm going to do one too, so that you can see how I've done it, and then you can model your own off how I've done that. So that means our WALT is how does a container of salt change over time. It is the 1st of March 2021. We're the third month of the year already. So before we go into our experiment, we're going to have a look at the do now. So the do now is here, which you do not need to print off if you don't want to. You can pause the video and look at it from here to the screen, or you can just open it up on the PDF as well, or print it off, as I know some of you like to do. So pause the video here, complete the do now, and in a moment we're going to come back and mark it together. Okay, fantastic. Let's see what you can remember from last week and last year and year 4 too. So let me reveal the answers. So the answer to number 1 was an independent variable is a factor of the experiment that doesn't change. So well done if you got that correct, tick or fix. Number 2, what is the change of state from liquid to gas known as? And that is known as evaporating. So well done if you got that correct. Number 3 from our current unit is circle the word that suits the definition. When you mix certain solids with a liquid, they appear to disappear, and that is dissolved. And finally, penultimately, number 4, what is the name that we measure forces by? And we measure forces by using newtons, based on Isaac Newton. And number 5, circle the type of teeth that can be found in humans. 1 are canines, 2 are incisors, 3 are molar. Incisions are not a type of teeth, the other 3 are, and I did say circle 3. So well done if you got all those correct. Fantastic. Don't forget to upload it to Seesaw so we can see all your fantastic work later on. Okay, so moving on to today's lesson. Before we start, we need to do a very quick recap about what does dissolve mean, what is soluble, and what is insoluble. So if you can just pause the video here for a moment and think about those 3 questions. What does dissolve mean? What does soluble mean? And what does insoluble mean? Okay, so dissolve, we know it means that when you mix a solid into water and it's able to mix, that solid has dissolved into the water. Soluble would mean that when it has dissolved, it has become transparent and has seemingly disappeared. And that means then that insoluble would mean that it was not transparent, even if it did dissolve, that it was not able to dissolve, or that it was not soluble, that you could still see it, that maybe it was cloudy or maybe it was muddy. So as we learned from our sugar experiment a couple of weeks ago. Okay, so a couple more questions. Just to make sure that we're aware of what we're talking about and that we can remember our previous knowledge. So 2 more questions, which you're going to pause the video in a second for. What does solvent mean? And what does solute mean? Okay, you can use the picture as a clue if you need some help. Pause the video here and think about these 2 questions. Okay, so solvent, as we can see from the picture, is the liquid. So in this case, it was the water. And the solute was the solid that went into the solvent. So the sugar was the solute and the water was the solvent. And then we know from previous experiments that the sugar was then soluble based on when we let it dissolve. So solvent is the liquid you use, in this case water. Solute is the solid you use, which in this case was sugar, which of course it can be any liquid or could be any solid too. Okay, right. So today's lesson, we are setting up our very own experiment. Now in the last lesson, what you discovered was that you dropped 3 different types of sugar, or maybe you did more at home, into hot water and you timed how long it took for them to dissolve. What findings did you take from that experiment? Just think back to last week and think about the findings that you took from that experiment and what you wrote in your conclusion. Okay, great. So this week, we are going to be focusing on how salt dissolves over a period of time by planning our experiment. And it's essentially going to be a week-long experiment, and at least it will last a couple of days. You'll set it up today, you'll plan it, and you'll do it today, and then you'll be keeping an eye on it for the rest of the week. So you'll have to find a cup that you can keep for the rest of the week so that you can go back over it and keep doing your science lesson every day this week. So a nice end to home learning. You'll have science to look at every single day. So we're going to have to think about the equipment we need. Now this is where my ideas come into play, and based on my ideas you're going to be able to then create your own experiment. So I have the sheet here that you have also in your home learning. If you don't have a printer, you can simply draw the grid and onto a lined piece of paper, and that does the exact same job. So I'm going to have to think of the equipment I'm going to need for an experiment with salt and how long it takes salt to dissolve or to become soluble. So obviously, as we know from previous experiments, I'm going to need a container. As I'm investigating salt, I'm going to need salt. I'm also going to use my solvent is going to be water. And you get to choose the temperature that you're going to do the water. Now, because I'm recording, simply I'm just going to choose cold water because my hot water often does go cold anyway. So just for simplicity for myself, I'm going to do water that is cold. You can do boiling water if you want, if you have the permission of a parent and the supervision of a parent. You can do lukewarm water too, or you can do cold water like me. And I'm also going to need a spoon because I'm going to choose to mix it. You don't have to mix it, you could let it sit there and see if it dissolves. And you're going to need your list of instructions that we're going to create in a moment. Now, that's the equipment I need, so I'm going to get all that very shortly. I'm also going to think about the instructions and what I'm going to do in my experiment. Okay, so if someone else is going to conduct this experiment, I need to make a list of instructions that's going to be easy for them to follow. So in a moment I'm going to discuss the variables which are up here, and like the amount of water, the amount of salt, how many stirs, how long I'm going to leave it sit, where I'm going to place it, and the temperature of the water, and so on. So my first instruction is going to be, you're going to have to measure the solvent and pour into a container. Okay, so whatever amount of water you choose, you're going to have to choose that amount, you're going to have to measure it and pour into a container. Also, you then have to add the solute, which is the salt. Into the solvent. And number 3, you then have to stir the solute into the solvent. Okay, so you're going to measure the solvent, the amount of water you want, you're going to add the amount of solute or salt you want, and you're going to put it in there, and then you're going to have to stir it. Then you'll have to leave the container and put it in its location. Put container in location. So I've now decided on the equipment I need, as well as the instructions I'm going to have to undertake to complete the experiment. The next step is the variables. Now this is a really important step, thinking about what's going to stay the same, what's going to be different. So it needs to be a fair test, and we've discussed a fair test a lot this half term. You need to think about the following. You're going to think about how much salt you're going to use, how much water you'll use, what temperature the water will be, I've kind of already discussed that, how many days you're going to leave the beaker or the container to sit, and then where in the classroom, for me, and at home for you, will you position the beaker. Okay, so just think about where you're going to leave it. So let's have a look at what variables I'm going to do. So I can see here I need to think about how much salt I'm going to use. The amount of salt, that variable is going to be I'm going to say I'll do 3 teaspoons of salt. You could do 3 tablespoons if you wanted. That's up to you. Now I'm going to think of the amount of water I'm going to use. So I'm going to just choose 350 milliliters of water. You can choose more, you can choose less, depending on how you want to conduct it. I said the temperature of the water would be cold, so I'm going to have cold water. I'm going to leave my experiment for 5 days. Okay, because I'm starting on a Monday, I'm going to finish it off on the Friday. And my location will be the teacher's desk. Okay, it could be your own desk in your room, it could be a corner of the kitchen, it could be your kitchen table. It depends where you're going to leave it. Remember, say if you leave it on a radiator, just think about maybe the radiator might be turned on, so it might get warm, so that might affect how fast the salt dissolves. So maybe just choose a location that's quite neutral, that's out of sunlight, that isn't too cold, that isn't too warm, and that is just quite neutral that you could use. So there's the variables that I've chosen alongside the equipment and my instructions as well about how to conduct the experiment. Now, the very last thing before we do conduct it that we must think about is how we're going to record our findings. Okay, I'm going to think about the data and collecting my data. You could make a very simple yes/no questionnaire, like a survey to answer daily, or you could make notes on how clear the water becomes daily. So just for simplicity, because this is science after all, I'm going to use a yes/no survey. To examine the changes each day over 5 days, remember, for me. I will do this at 9 o'clock each morning. So you need to do it at the same time every day, or as close as possible as the same time every day. I'll do this at 9 a.m. each day. So you might be able to do it after our briefing every morning. And I will check in the briefings as well and see how you're getting on. Okay, so I have now made a plan for that experiment. I've thought about the equipment I need. I've made a list of instructions that I'm going to have to follow. I've thought about the variables, what's going to stay the same, what's going to change, and I've decided how I'm going to collect my data each day. So because I've got the plan done, I am now able to go and set up my experiment. So because I'm recording, I have kind of set it up previously and I'm just going to show you what I've done. So my plan is my plan. You've the options to change that to suit yourself and to think about different things that you want to test out in terms of the amount of salt and the amount of water, the amount of solute, the amount of solvent to see if things dissolve and become soluble. So my amount of water is 350 milliliters of water. I need my container and I need 350 milliliters of water here. That was step 1. Measure the solvent and pour into a container. So I did that previously. That's done. There's my solvent in the container. Then I need to add the solute, which is the salt, and I decided that I would have 3 teaspoons of salt. So I have my salt prepared here. So I'm going to pour 3 teaspoons of salt into my cold 350 milliliters of water. So here's 1. There's 2. And there's 3. So not quite 3, I need to make sure I have the right amount. And 3. Now in my instructions, I said I was going to stir the solute into the solvent. So I'm going to do just 1 stir. So I'm going to go around once. I'm going to go around once. So there's my 1 stir. So the salt is now in this, the water. It's quite cloudy at the moment, and I'm going to monitor that over the next 5 days. So it looks like it will dissolve. Whether it becomes soluble or not is another thing, and that's something we're going to investigate over the next few days. So there, that is set up. I followed my steps. I had measured the solvent and poured it into the container. My second step was to add the solute into the solvent. That's what I did. I then stirred it once. I'm going to actually write that into my variables, just so it's clear. 1 stir. Okay, you can do more stirs if you want. And I must put the container in the location. So I'm already sitting at my desk. So it's going to stay on this desk because it's out of sunlight, it's not near a radiator, it's not too warm, it's not too cold, and it's going to stay there for the next 5 days. So I have set up the experiment now, but what I also need to do is look at a prediction. Okay, it is set up. I've decided to leave it for 5 days. I'm going to have to make a prediction about what is going to happen to the salt each day for those 5 days. So you can get out your book or your page or any bit of sheet that you have, and I'm going to write prediction and I'm going to underline that subtitle. So my prediction is, over the course of the 5 days, the salt will have dissolved fully and become soluble. Okay, so I think the salt will be soluble within the water. I'm going to predict what day that's going to happen. So at the moment I'm looking at it, it's quite cloudy. It's kind of gone down to the bottom a small bit after stirring it. So I'm going to think it's definitely going to take a few days. So I predict that it will be soluble by day 4, brackets Thursday. Today is day 1, it's Monday. Okay, that is my prediction complete. So you're going to have to write a prediction as well. So I'd encourage you now to pause the video, to go and plan your experiment and to write the prediction, okay? And then come back and I'm going to show you how to do the recording about how am I going to record it. So I've done a lot there. I've modeled how to plan the experiment. I've showed you how to set it up. And I've also modeled the prediction. So I want you to pause the video here and then come back once you've done that. And I'm going to show you how to record your findings. Okay, so I hope it's all set up. I hope you've made your prediction. I hope that your plan is pretty clear that I can see on Seesaw later on. So in the plan, I've decided how to collect my data and I've decided to use a yes/no survey to examine the changes. Okay, and I'm going to do that at 9 AM each day. So I'm going to set up my recording now. So again, recording or data collection, you could also use that as your subtitle. And now I'm going to underline it because it is a subtitle, just to keep it neat. Okay, I have a question to ask. I'm looking at, has the salt dissolved more than yesterday? Okay, that is the question I'm going to ask myself every morning at 9 o'clock to see, has the salt actually dissolved more than yesterday? Day 1. Have a look tomorrow. Yes or no, and then you will circle whether yes, it has dissolved more or no, it hasn't. Day 2. Yes or no, based on day 1, has it dissolved more than day 1 or not at all? Day 3. Yes or no, and you circle. Day 4, the exact same thing, yes or no. And then day 5, yes or no. So that is how we're going to do the recording. Like I said, you can also take notes each day if you prefer writing things out. But just because this is science, I like to do things speedily and just have kind of survey that I can just refer back to every day. So my question is, has the salt dissolved more than yesterday? And that is what I'm going to look at every single day at 9 AM. And I'm going to circle yes or no every day. And we'll do that together in our briefings too, together to see how we're getting on. So really the idea behind this lesson is that you can create your own experiment. The plan is on the home learning document that I've modeled. You can rewind the video if you need to see that again if you haven't completed it. You need to make a prediction to see what you think and what the salt will dissolve or whether it won't and what day that will happen. And then finally you need to set up some sort of recording or data collection so that you can refer back to it each day. So I hope you enjoy this experiment. It's a chance to do science every single day for the last week of home learning, a really nice way to finish. And so thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to discussing these in our briefings. Okay, have a lovely Monday and I will talk to you soon. Bye.